I tied him up, head, neck, arms and feet so he could barely move. The beauty of it was the more he struggled, the more the noose tightened around his neck. I kept him and had my fun with him for days before I threw his battered body into the Odra River. I showed him who is superior. You ask, how did I overcome a 200-pound, 6-foot man? I answer, you have not yet understood the power of my intellect. Krystian Bala, author of Amok, 2003.
This show contains descriptions of violent crimes and may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello and thank you for joining me for another episode of Prash's Murder Map. Today we're going to journey to Wrocław, one of Poland's largest cities. It's home to a well-respected university, renowned for its excellent teaching and for 9 of its graduates who went on to become Nobel Prize winners. But it was also the alma mater of a man who fancied himself an intellectual but later hit the headlines, not for his academic success, but for committing one of Poland's most sensational murders. Before we jump into it, I know as a listener how hard it can be to find great shows, so I'd like to play a promo for Emily, writer and host of the Morbidology podcast, focusing on obscure, bizarre and morbid stories from all over the world. Please check out her show if you haven't already.
Morbidology is a weekly true crime podcast hosted by me, Emily G. Thompson, author of Unsolved Child Murders, Cults Uncovered, and co-author of Unsolved Murders, True Crime Cases Uncovered.
911 emergency. My son shot my husband. I need an ambulance. He's bleeding.
Using investigative research combined with primary audio, including 911 calls, interviews, and trial testimony, Morbidology takes a look at some of the world's most heinous murders.
Do you know why you're here?
For a home invasion gone terribly wrong.
Listen to Morbidology now on Apple, Spreaker, Stitcher, Podbean, or wherever else you get podcasts.
Our story started on the morning of November the 13th in the year 2000. In the office of a small advertising company in Wrocław, the phone rang. It was answered by the mother of the man who owned the business, Darius Januszewski.
I need some signs made for my business as soon as possible.
I'm afraid the owner of the company isn't available right now. Can I help?
No, I will only speak to the owner about this.
All right, I'll give you his mobile number. What did you say your name was?
Thank you. Goodbye.
Januszewski's mother gave the caller her son's mobile number, knowing that he wouldn't want to miss out on a potential client. But she thought it was strange that the customer didn't want to give his name. Less than a minute later, the anonymous client called Darius on his cell phone and arranged to meet him that afternoon. Darius returned to the office after his morning appointments.
Darius, did you get a call from someone wanting some signs made urgently?
Yes, I did. Thanks. I'm meeting him later today.
At 4 p.m, Darius left the office to meet the client, but left his car in the parking lot, which was out of the ordinary, as he usually drove to all his meetings. It was the last time his friends, family and colleagues saw him alive. When he didn't make it home that night, his wife reported him missing. A month later, anglers hoping to catch fish near the banks of the river Odra got more than they bargained for. They saw a shape floating past and thought it was a log, but when it got closer, they realised the shocking truth. It made an icy chill run down their spines, much more than the cold December weather ever could. It was the bloated, partially clothed body of a man. The police taped off the crime scene and searched the surrounding forest, and divers searched for evidence at the bottom of the river, but no clues were found. The body had been in the water for so long that any forensic evidence had long since washed away. The fishing spot was 60 miles out from the city and very remote, so it was a lucky chance that anyone had ever stumbled across the body. It was soon confirmed to be missing 35-year-old Darius Yanishevsky. He had been tied with rope around his head, neck, arms and feet in a very unusual way, which meant that the more he moved his limbs, the more the rope would tighten around his neck, like a noose strangling him. There was evidence of severe injury, and it looked like he had been beaten around the face with a tool of some kind. His digestive system was completely empty, meaning he hadn't eaten for at least 3 days prior to death. What this indicated was horrifying. The killer had kept him alive for days, starving and torturing him until he eventually tired of his games and threw him into the river. The pathologist originally thought the cause of death was strangulation by the rope, but the amount of water in the victim's lungs suggested he had drowned after being thrown in while still breathing. At first, police suspected a gang execution. It seemed unlikely it had just been one attacker, as Darius was over 6 feet tall and weighed more than 200 pounds. But criminal psychologist David Holmes believes that the nature of the killing showed a lot of anger and was very personal. Someone had seen it as their mission to punish Yanishevsky and had enjoyed doing it. The gang theory soon started to look less likely when detectives examined the victim's background. He was friendly and popular, and he and his wife were happy and planning to adopt a child. He had no debts and no enemies, ran a successful business, and enjoyed playing the guitar in a rock band with his friends. He had no criminal record and was an extremely low-risk victim. Police were at a loss to find a motive, and the media began dubbing it the perfect crime. Having exhausted all their options, police contacted Mikhail Fajbusewicz, host of 997, Poland's most popular TV crime show. A message went out on the show about the murder, asking for witnesses to come forward. Television exposure has helped to solve many of Poland's cases in the past, but this time the results were disappointing. There were no new leads. It was as if the murderer had come and gone like a phantom, completely invisible and unnoticed. The murder of Darius Yanishevsky slipped further and further towards a pile of cold case files, and by June the following year it was mostly forgotten. But 18 months later, in 2003, a routine review of unsolved cases took place at Wrocław police station. Lead investigator Jacek Wroblewski picked up the file and began to read. Wroblewski was 38 and fiercely proud of being a police officer, a job he had held for 9 years. He studied psychology at university before deciding to join the police force, and this equipped him with the curiosity to dig deep into every case to untangle the truth. At first the prospect looked bleak. Even with a fresh look at the facts, there were still no clues to a possible motive. But Wroblewski wasn't giving up so easily. He spent days scrutinising the details of the murder and eventually realised that the victim's cell phone had never been recovered from the crime scene, even though he'd had it with him when he disappeared. Wróblewski knew this might lead nowhere, but it was the only possible thread he could pick up to breathe new life into the dying investigation, so he focused on tracking it down. Miraculously, Janiszewski's wife had kept the receipt for his mobile phone, and on it was the IMEI number, which a telecoms expert explained could be used to discover whether the device was still in use. Unbelievably, it was. Immediately, Wróblewski seized the opportunity to find out who had the phone and how they'd got hold of it. His dogged determination paid off. He found that the phone had been bought and sold multiple times since the murder. He painstakingly traced its journey back to an internet auction site called Allegro. Someone with the username ChrisB7 had sold it for 285 Polish zloty, the equivalent of about 50 British pounds, or about $63, just days after the murder. Wróblewski soon discovered that ChrisB7 was 30-year-old writer and businessman Krystian Bala. But the detective knew he didn't yet have enough evidence, so he delved into Bala's background while keeping an open mind. After all, there could be an innocent explanation. His initial suspicions turned out to be well-founded when he stumbled across Bala's blog with extracts from his first novel, Amok, graphically describing a murder committed by a protagonist sharing Bala's first name, Chris. Here's a clip of Bala reading aloud from his book.
Ribs cracked, but the long steel blade entered her. The blood spurted.
While we're talking about books, I'd just like to quickly mention Audible. Now, I've pledged to avoid advertising on this podcast as much as possible, but I will sometimes mention things that I think are relevant and that my listeners would genuinely enjoy. I listen to audiobooks on Audible regularly, and there's a great range available, including crime fiction. Membership gives you one audiobook every month, exclusive deals, and a no-quibble exchange for any title you didn't like. If you decide to cancel, you still get to keep your audiobooks. You can get 50% off Audible membership for the first 3 months if you use the link on my website, www.prashesmurdermap.com/Audible discount. If you're not sure about signing up just yet, you can also follow my link to get a free 30-day trial. That's www.prashesmurdermap.com/Audible discount. And I'll put that link in the show notes as well. Thanks everyone for your support. Krystian Bala's book was like the diary of a murderer. Described as an adults-only experience, it was a toxic combination of graphic pornography and sadistic violence with barely a hint of a plot. The main character Chris was a bored Polish intellectual interested in philosophy. He thought he could do whatever he wanted and that the law didn't apply to him. His wife left him after catching him having an affair, and he goes on a rampage. In one scene, he stole a statue of a saint from a church and repeatedly criticised Catholicism. Chapter 9 vividly described the murder of the character's girlfriend Mary, who was tied up, stabbed with a knife, and left to die. In the story, Chris hid the murder so well that he was never caught. Chillingly, he then sold the murder weapon on an internet auction site. Wróblewski ordered a copy of Amok, read it cover to cover, and was shocked at the parallels with the murder of Darius Janiszewski. He read it again and again, analysing every line, trying to glean any information he could. Bala was now the prime suspect. But was the content of a fictional book enough evidence to accuse him of murder? And what was the motive? Could it be the same as protagonist Chris's motive in the book, revealed on the final page in the line, "This was the one killed by blind jealousy"? The coincidences were too many to ignore. Bala had left Poland in 2001 and spent time in Asia and America, teaching English and writing for travel magazines. There wasn't enough evidence to attempt extradition, but Wroblewski refused to let his suspicions go. He didn't want to interview Bala's friends and family in case they tipped him off, and he never returned to Poland, so he waited patiently until one day in 2005, Bala's passport was flagged entering the country. He was arrested and interrogated by court prosecutor Marcin Kucharski. Kucharski described Bala as very dismissive and not at all worried by the situation he found himself in. Kucharski decided to test him.
Come on, Krystian. Tell me. Did you have helped killing Darius Janiszewski? No. I killed him on my own. I did not need help.
By suggesting that Bala needed help and wouldn't have been able to commit the murder on his own, Kucharski had tempted a confession out of him. Bala's arrogance prevented him from keeping quiet. He just couldn't let people believe that he wouldn't have been capable of the crime. But Bala quickly realised his mistake. He began to act oddly and asked for a drink, saying he was feeling ill. The interview was suspended while he was checked by a medic, but the doctor found nothing wrong with him and allowed the interrogation to continue, at which point Bala retracted his confession and refused to sign any documents. It was as though he was playing a game with the police and had a desire to always be in control. Prosecutor Kucharski contacted a psychologist to try to understand the suspect's behaviour. An expert from the Institute of Forensic Research in Krakow identified that Bala showed sociopathic traits and narcissism. He considered himself to be a superior human being, more intelligent than anyone else and better in every way. This explained his demeanour in the interview room, acting as if he was in complete control, with no sign of stress or anxiety. He simply believed he would always come out on top thanks to his superior intellect. But without the confession, how could prosecutors build a case against Bala that would stand up in court? The team began digging further into the suspect's life to find out more. Krystian Bala was born in the Silesian region in 1973 and had one younger sibling. His father was a construction worker and a taxi driver. Bala was a good pupil at school and was clearly intelligent, but he was different from the other children and frequently got into arguments and fights because of his huge ego. He was the first person in his family to go to university, where he studied philosophy. This was where things changed for him, as he reinvented himself and became much more popular than he had been at school. He still believed he was superior to everyone else, but his confidence, charm and ability to weave stories about himself ensured he was liked by teachers and students, both male and female. One of his professors described him as having an inquisitive and rebellious mind. But after a while, people noticed that while he was often very pleasant, he had spates of suddenly turning nasty. He was confrontational, and although he could charm women in the short term, his lies and myths soon started to fall apart. It got to the point where even his friends didn't know what was true about him and what was fiction. He married his girlfriend Stasia in 1995, aged just 23, and psychologists believe this was less about love and more about adding to the perfect persona he had created for himself. He dreamed of being a successful academic, and now he had Stasia to play the role of his wife. He graduated in 1997 with top grades and signed up for the PhD program, aspiring to a career in academia. Things didn't turn out the way he planned. Not long after they were married, Krystian and Stasia had a son. He left his university studies and started a cleaning company to make money to support his new family, convinced that he was destined to be a successful entrepreneur. The business didn't work out, and just a year later he filed for bankruptcy. By now his marriage was falling apart too. He had several affairs with other women, but grew increasingly jealous of his wife. He had frequent bursts of narcissistic rage and even physically assaulted Stasha. As far as he was concerned, he could do anything he liked, but Stasha had to stay at home, look after their son, and do what he told her. Their divorce in 1999 was bitter, but despite his own infidelity, he was still obsessed with Stasha. A friend of hers reported that she'd witnessed Bala following his ex-wife to a bar and threatening her.
"I will kill you and all your men."
According to psychologists, narcissistic people often create a different reality for themselves and fantasize events that aren't real. Breakups with narcissistic individuals can lead to stalking and a fixation on not letting anyone else steal what they imagine to be their property. With Bala, it was a case of, if I can't have her, then no one will. In summer 1999, Stasha met Darius in a bar, and the pair dated very briefly, although it went no further when she discovered he was already married. Bala somehow found out and confronted her, kicking down the door of her apartment and shouting that he knew about her relationship with the businessman and musician. Another witness, one of Stasha's friends, said that Bala had once quizzed her for information about Darius, asking who he was and where he worked. When Darius went missing a few months later, Stasha didn't go to the police about the incident, as despite her ex-husband's anger, she didn't believe he was capable of murder. But investigators had more than just witness testimony. They found out that the calls to the victim's company on the day of his disappearance were made by a phone card used in a nearby phone box. Although police never found the phone card, every call was logged, so investigators were able to uncover that whoever had used the card to call Darius had also called Bala's parents and friends. It was clear that the phone card had belonged to Bala. Better still, when police searched Bala's parents' home, they found several of his belongings. They didn't expect to find any physical evidence, as 5 years had passed since the murder, but they stumbled across a key piece of evidence, a notebook with details of the victim's company inside, one of his company pens and a business card. Despite denials that he'd never met Yanishevsky, this proved that there was undeniably a link between suspect and victim. TV crime show 997, which had tried to elicit leads from the public a couple of years before, came forward to say that the show's website had received a number of hits from different parts of the world, including Japan, Korea and America, which was very strange. Police matched immigration stamps in Bala's passport to IP addresses, visiting the crime show's website, and found that every time the site had received a hit from another country, Bala had been in that country at the exact same time. This was a man who saw killing as a game. He had written about his crime, enjoyed keeping tabs on the crime show seeking tips about the murder, and he had kept trophies from the killing, a business card and pen belonging to his victim. And the witness testimony kept on coming. One of his friends stated that during a New Year's Eve party to celebrate the arrival of the new millennium, an intoxicated Bala shouted that he'd killed one of his ex-wife's lovers and that he did it with a rope. On a previous occasion, it had taken 5 people to restrain him when he tried to attack a bartender who he thought was looking at Stasha. In the end, it was ruled that Bala's novel Amok could not be used at the trial, despite the parallels between the character and his own life, including both having a company going bankrupt and both stealing a statue of St. Anthony from a church, something that appeared in Bala's own criminal record. As far as the court was concerned, it was essentially just a story with similar events, but by now, Detective Wroblewski had a strong case without it. Even though the evidence from the novel was not admissible, Amok was all over the news and became a bestseller, while its author's trial became a media circus. Ironically, it was the first time he'd had much success with the book. Because of its graphic nature, not many bookstores carried it, and it only sold a few thousand copies. Detectives believed this was the reason he'd decided to publish extracts from it on his blog, in the hope of reaching a wider audience. There was never any question in his mind about whether his writing was any good. To him, it was only a matter of time before the dull, unintelligent masses appreciated his literary talent. In 2007, Bala was found guilty and sentenced to 25 years in prison. It's perplexing that someone so academically intelligent could make such basic errors, calling his victim from a phone card that could be traced, keeping Janishevsky's business card, selling his victim's phone on the internet, and most astonishingly of all, writing a book about a murder with stunning similarities to his own real-life crime. Perhaps he was too intelligent for his own good and was overconfident, so secure in the belief of his own supremacy that he never considered for a moment he would be caught. His frustration at his thwarted ambitions, like his failed business and lack of a successful academic career, led him to look for fame in a different way. He still protests his innocence. Here's some clips of him speaking.
Wroblewski claims that the crime scene in the book Ink was a key for his investigation, which is absurd. He must be, I don't know, an idiot, complete idiot, illiterate idiot. The book is kind of language game which has no relationship with anything in real life. I cannot recognize my book when it's cut off in pieces, and this is what I hate. They have ruined my personal life, my family life, my professional life, and they forced me to live behind bars, this hell on earth, for what? For nothing. I had never committed a crime, I have never done anything I should spend here a day, and I've been here almost 8 years. The judgment with such absurd conclusions had to be written by brainless jellyfish.
Bala appealed the guilty verdict, stating inconsistencies. For example, medical examiners disagreed about the cause of death, one testifying that Janishevsky died from strangulation, another saying he had drowned. The conviction was annulled, but he remained in prison until a retrial was held in December 2008. He was found guilty for a second time, and to the relief of Detective Wroblewski, Prosecutor Kucharski, and all the team involved with the case, the 25-year sentence was upheld. Throughout the trial, many people campaigned on Bala's behalf, claiming he was the victim of a witch hunt because of his criticism of the Catholic Church, and arguing that he was entitled to freedom of expression. Even in prison, he remains adamant that he will write a second novel called The Lyric, which translates to the lyric or the lyricist. Let's hope that the lyricist he planned to write about is better at writing songs than he is at writing books. Allegedly, police found evidence on his computer of plans to kill a second victim, which he would presumably turn into the sequel. The case remains one of the most memorable in Poland's criminal history. This bizarre and arrogant killer aspired to being a celebrated intellectual and a novelist, but all he succeeded in was writing himself into the annals of murder. Thank you for listening to this episode of Prash's Murder Map. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. I'd love to hear from you with any comments or suggestions, so get in touch via Twitter at Prash's Murder Map, visit www.prashasmurdermap.com, or do things the old-fashioned way and email me at prashesmurdermap@gmail.com. Next time we'll be travelling back to early 1900s Minnesota to examine the sad case of 21-year-old Alice Matthews, who went out for an evening with friends only to be killed just outside her own home. Her killer has never been found. Until then, take care.